Welcome to Nerdology, where we dive into the science behind consumer behavior, sensory research, and the latest hot topics in behavioral science. Quick insights, expert reviews, and conference highlights, all in bite-sized form. Let's get nerdy. Hi, and welcome back to Nerdoscientist, where we turn nerdy knowledge into better decisions. Today, I'm going to talk about a word that I constantly hear in consumer and sensory research conversations lately, and that's implicit. Everyone says they're doing it. Everyone says they have a tool, and everyone says it gets at what consumers really think. But the more teams I work with, the more I realize something maybe kind of surprising. Most clients don't actually know what kind of implicit they work with or that they're being sold, or whether it's truly implicit at all. So, over the past year or so, I've been leading courses and advising teams on different types of implicit methods, both how to understand them and how to design studies that actually lead to impact and action and not just interesting charts or notes, right? And one thing keeps coming up again and again. Clients are genuinely surprised by how many different ways vendors implement something that they all call implicit. Some approaches are grounded in cognitive psychology, things like reaction time-based association measures that look at automatic mental links between concepts. Others can rely on just fast or forced choice. Some use behavioral or physiological proxies, and some are essentially just explicit methods with a faster interface and better branding. They can all look pretty slick, and they can all produce clean outputs, but they are not measuring the same things necessarily, and that does really matter. Another thing that often surprises me and surprises clients is how often implicit work isn't actually run in-house by the vendor selling the study. In practice, many full-service research firms, especially in the sensory and marketing research areas, they design the overall study and then they'll outsource the implicit component to a specialized third-party provider. And I want to be very clear that that isn't necessarily inherently a problem. In fact, there are very good reasons that this model exists. Implicit tools are technically very complex, and doing it right does require very specific capabilities in your survey hosting platform and for your programmers. They can be expensive to build and even more expensive to validate properly. So many firms prefer to stay tool agnostic, and there are specialists who do this work extremely well. So why not lean on them rather than try to make something subpar? And I know this because I've worked in those back rooms where I have worked for a company that supplied this sort of backroom implicit measure. I've also designed platforms and methods that were ultimately sold under someone else's name. When the collaboration is transparent and well understood, this model can work beautifully and just very well and give the best results. The risk isn't the outsourcing. The risk is the opacity. When a client believes my vendor does implicit, but the reality is closer to my vendor subcontracted an implicit module that they don't fully control, understand, or have the ability to explain. Then interpretation gets super shaky and accountability gets fuzzy, and therefore trust can sort of quietly erode. Implicit data is not self-explanatory. It's not as simple as just being able to say that this thing is more highly associated. Unlike explicit measures, there's no built-in intuition for what a number actually means. The value of the data depends heavily on how the task was designed in the first place, like which stimuli were chosen and what assumptions were made very early on in the design process, often long before the client ever sees a result. This is also why implicit data is so easy to overinterpret. When results arrive as these neat little scores or rankings and a very convenient looking graph or chart, there's a temptation to treat them as very definitive answers rather than what they really are, which is this very uncomfortable space of being just indicators of association strength that need more context. This is where things can go really wrong if implicit methods are treated as a black box. Implicit research works best when it's paired with well-designed explicit measures and when teams are willing to explore alignment as well as divergence rather than trying to force everything into a single story. In other words, implicit isn't about replacing explicit data, but it's about finding how these two data sources complement each other. So, what actually works? The most successful implicit projects I've ever seen are never plug and play. It's never something that you just sort of blindly agree to and have people log into from afar. They tend to be the custom designed around a very real decision. They use implicit data to generate hypotheses and not just trying to get final verdicts. They pair implicit and explicit measures intentionally rather than just separately. And they involve close collaboration between not just the different vendors that are working together, but also with the client and with method experts throughout the process. Yes, this does take more time than just doing something off the shelf, but it's also vastly more actionable in the long run. This is also where someone like me can fit in. A research doula, like myself, helps clients understand what's possible, what's risky, and how to ask better questions before vendors are even selected. I act as a translator between cognitive science and market research language. I can advocate for clarity when tools or claims get sort of fuzzy, and I often help teams interpret and communicate results responsibly. And most importantly, I help clients trust without being naive. Vendor relationships should absolutely be built on trust, but trust works best when it's paired with understanding and clarity. So the next time you hear, yes, we do implicit, it's worth pausing and asking, well, what kind of implicit is it? How is it run? And what is it really telling me? That's where better insight begins. So, thanks for listening as always. As your friendly neighborhood nerdoscientist, catch me next time. Looking forward to seeing you on the conference circuit. Thanks. Bye.